im se svima, i malima i velikima, i bogatima i siromašnima, i slobodnjacima i robovima, dade žig na njihovu desnu ruku ili na čela njihova, te da nitko ne može ništa kupiti ili prodati, osim onoga ko ima žig ili ime zvijeri ili broj imena njezina.
Pozdrav dragi narode, dobrodošli u još jednu epizodu Slobodni. Približavamo se finalu Svjetske zdravstvene organizacije i tog međunarodnog treatija, takozvanog, za nove pandemije, kao International Health Regulations. Međutim, osjećamo sve više i više otpora iz cijelog svijeta, među kojima najžešći otpori dolazi upravo iz Sjedinjenih država. Stoga sam iskoristio priliku da vam prezentiram što se trenutno događa i što čine Sjedinjene države kako ne bi prihvatili novi ugovor, a naravno da nakon toga postavljamo pitanje što će i Hrvatska učiniti. Moj današnji gost je gospodin Joe Gebbia. Hello Joe, welcome to our show in Croatia.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is really quite an honor. I'm so happy to be here.
Great. Can you say to our audience who is Joe Gebbia?
Okay, sure. My name is Joe Gebbia. I live in Austin, Texas. I am retired, and I was looking for an opportunity to spend a lot of time with my grandchildren. Unfortunately, the situation in the world right now brought to my attention. I had to get involved to ensure that my grandchildren would be able to have the experience of America as I know it should be. And there have been so many changes taking place that really started in the mid-teens of 2017, 2018, and very much so with COVID, that I felt the need to assume an activist role, and I created State Shield. And it was developed to represent the states, the United States, all 50 states, in the equation of what's going on right now. And it was a void that nobody else was filling. And I'm sure that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Yes. First, we will discuss what is happening in WHO. Now they have a 77 World Assembly, and they want to make some new decisions, new treaty and international health regulations. What is your opinion about this?
Well, it's very bad for the world. I'll stay with America first, and then I'll take it outside our perimeters. It's definitely not in the best interest of the United States. They're not really interested in health. They're not really interested in prevention. It's really a grab at power and consolidation, control. It's very obvious. And that's one reason why they're having such a problem in having agreement. If the WHO is successful in implementing or getting approval on any part of the pandemic treaty or the international health regulation updates, it'll be the first time that the world will be experiencing the evolution of a world governance. It will be the first time one person will have complete authority over every country in this aspect of health. And it'll just morph from there. It'll just grow like a cancer from there. And that's the way they operate. This is being done on so many fronts, the Chinese impact. And I can talk specifically about that in America. It's being done via the WHO. And in just about every instance, you're going to find the Chinese are going to have their fingers involved in everything that's going on.
Yeah.
That's my general interpretation of what's going on with the treaty. Yeah.
We will go in detail about this Chinese influence, but now you have some news. There's 20 district attorneys. They decided to write a letter to Joe Biden. Can you tell us what is content?
Yeah. This was one of the successes of State Shield. I'll first say that the Chinese know the difference of how our federalist government works. We have our national government, and then we have our states government, and they're separated. Chinese know this, and they've been driving a wedge between the two of them to maximize it for their advantage, which is why I created State Shield. So as a byproduct in the fight against the WHO, what I did is I presented the case to the Republican Attorney General Association. I tried to do it with the Democratic Association, but they really weren't interested. They're backing President Biden, who's ardently and very, very supportive of the move for the WHO to take control. So it's barking up the wrong tree. And what I did is presented to them the standard information that is commonly available now, if people take the time to research this, about the negative impact that the World Health Organization will have on the sovereignty or the freedom of America to manage its own healthcare system. They agreed. They unified. 22 of the 28 signed the letter of protest to President Biden and have thus submitted it. And that is a very, very, very loud statement. The attorney generals are the key legal enforcers in every state. And their job is to make sure that they're looking after the what is correct in their state, and that any law that is passed is constitutional and will not harm the state. And they recognize how deleterious this would be on each state in the United Nations.
We have this letter here. Can you go through this letter?
Sure. I don't have it in front of me. It outlines every step of, not every step, but the majority of the steps that they were looking at, or that I had proposed to them. And basically, the WHO is looking for the ability, even though they're looking for the ability to be able to say when a pandemic is present. And then they want to be able to also have complete control in declaring if they think a pandemic is going to be coming. And with that type of basis, they want to empower themselves to then have the full control on what must be done, from distribution of vaccines, from the timing of the vaccines. They're looking at implementing a process called the 100-day vaccine, which is basically a standard base that would be altered with whatever they need to address. And these vaccines would not be tested. There would be no medical scientific proof of no harm to be caused. They want to be able to control mask mandates. They want to be able to control business closures. They want to implement the digital banking system, which is basically the social control system that is very well performed in China on all of the Chinese people. And it's basically a repeat of what we saw during COVID-19. And unfortunately, that was a very, very bad period of time as far as infringement on our constitutional rights in here for freedom of assembly, for freedom of speech, for freedom of choice, for medical freedom. And if we learned nothing else from COVID-19, we learned that those in charge really weren't looking after our best interests. They had a bigger picture involved, which focused around control, which was very, very obviously, and concentration of power. And it always resorts back to the money. I mean, if you ever want to know what the cause of a problem is or what the resolution of a problem is, just go back and look at the money flow, the money source, and it oftentimes will indicate what the cause is or what the resolution to a problem could be.
Yes.
And
Can you tell us about these money flows? What do you have? Which information?
Well,
who was financing this?
It was basically a military operation done in the United States. The warp speed that President Trump introduced had actually started way back in 2017, 2018, and it was being developed. So when COVID came and a resolution needed to be had as far as an option to help address, this was well in the making, and was licensed to the pharmaceutical companies as in my opinion, a rouge to create legitimacy. And I mean, if you look at the problems that have resulted from the use of the vaccines, the actual ingredients in the vaccines varied often many times. And there was no consistency. There was no long-term tests. They refused to, some of the tests that were done were altered incorrectly. It was not done in a scientific way. And this has been documented time and time and time again by many of the people. And a good source of reference to this would be CHD, which is Children's Health Defense. It's a great website. That was started by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is now a presidential candidate, obviously, in the United States. Back in the beginning of the COVID period, he was the lone soldier who was actually standing up for just about all of America, taking a lot of hits, and really just staying true to what the situation was and what needed to be done. And even though he was hit as hard as he was by our social media networks and banned on most of the channels, today I think he's kingpin, and his organization has taken the lead in really putting out and proving the things that he said then are now being accepted as being the truth. And as far as really how this was handled and the missteps that were had from the manufacturing mandating that everybody have it. They were out there saying that this is safe and approved, that it was effective against COVID. We all know that that is not true now. We all know that the spike protein, which was the key ingredients in the mRNA product, was supposed to stay in one section of the arm, like every other vaccine that's given in the muscle tissue. And in this case, the directions given to the doctors and the medical professionals was to actually inject it into a bloodstream, and so it circulated through the body. And the spike protein had the ability to duplicate itself, and it really enhances the immune system, which puts it into overdrive and causes many of the problems that resulted from the vaccine on people. And it also had the ability to penetrate the blood-brain barrier, which was the first time. And they had to come out. I mean, AstraZeneca, I think just last week, officially pulled their product from the market in Europe.
Yes, they did, yeah.
They've had to admit that it causes blood clots.
Yeah.
Which is a big problem right now with myocarditis.
Mm-hmm. Of course, we see now all other problems, and we have now even confirmation that this spike protein is directly connected with this P53, and that means that can cause cancer. But okay, what was the role in WHO during this pandemic?
Well, WHO was headed by Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, who was not a medical doctor. He was a health minister out of Ethiopia, and he was plucked out of that position to take the role of Director General of the WHO 6 years ago. And on a 5-year term, he just got reelected. And he was really the handpick of Xi Jinping in China. He was the CCP's primary choice, and he was also backed by Bill Gates. And if you look at the WHO, the primary financial contributor to the WHO is the United States. And the second largest contributor is Bill Gates. So they accept their money from sovereign nations and also individuals. But when individuals give their funding to the WHO, they don't do it just in a straight philanthropic purpose. They have an objective that they're trying to achieve. And whether it's Bill Gates or anybody else, they are going to be directing the WHO to use that money in a manner that they think is best. And that's not always, in my opinion, in the best interest of the health of the world. And during COVID, Tedros, as the leader, refused to address the issue of the sourcing of the COVID-19 virus, which everybody believes is the Wuhan lab. And he encouraged shutdowns. So for our CDC, for example, we need to go back and take a look at how this was created. So in 2005, the WHO created the amendments, and it was centered around getting worldwide participation if international pandemic was created, which made a lot of sense. And that's a good role to play. And their participation in that, or our participation in that as the United States, we accepted it as an advisory role. So that means that they could come and they say, this is what we think you should do, and this is what we suggest you do. And we would have the right to say, yeah, I think that's great, we'll do it. Or no, that's not the way we think it's best to be done. What's going on now in Geneva is they want to change the terminology of the original 2005 amendment agreement from advisory to governance. Big change. In the United States, that would be a treaty that would have significant binding effects on our requirement to abide by, which would need to have approval of the United States Senate, according to our Constitution. The Constitution says that the United States Senate has to advise and consent to the President on international treaties that affect the population of the United States. Well, the 2005 was a presidential agreement. It was by President Bush. And it did not have binding impact on the United States. It was advisory, as I said earlier. So what President Biden is trying to do now is he's put out a statement already saying that he was not going to be bringing this to the United States Senate for review. He simply was going to just say, it's just an update to the amendments that have already been agreed to by a presidential agreement. But the terms of that agreement are radically different and require the review of the Senate, which is why I involved the AGs in the letter that we had talked about previously. So getting back to your original question, now that that premise is set, the WHO, during the COVID period of time, did a terrible job in managing the COVID-19. They supported minimizing the availability of options to treat COVID. And we know now, for as hard as they tried, ivermectin was a very effective tool. And I can tell you personally, I had COVID twice and I did not get the COVID-19 shot. And I used ivermectin when I contracted COVID. And in 5 days, I was pretty much out of the clear. 3 to 5, third day, I was feeling great. 5 days later, I was back to normal for the most part. You know, the hydroxychloroquine, the way they knocked these repurposed drugs, they couldn't support it because the only way the COVID-19 vaccine through the pharmaceutical companies was justified was as an emergency use vaccine. And you can't have an emergency use status if there is an alternate product that could be proved to be successful. And ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine had that capability. Unfortunately, they were demonized to maintain the status of emergency use, which was a financial decision. So we're getting back to the money question. And it was mandated that folks take it. And a lot of people lost their jobs, and a lot of people got injured by it. It was really made for the folks that were in the latter ages, 65 and above, and who had comorbidities, like blood pressure, heart ailments, just comorbidities, things that would make them more likely to suffer a health injury. They were more vulnerable. But when they went right down the list, and even to children whose participation in getting ill with COVID was virtually nil, made absolutely no sense. So it was driven by primarily money. And there's a secondary issue that perhaps we'll talk about in a minute. But
what you can achieve with this letter? Can we show this letter again? And it's signed by 20 district attorneys. What you can achieve with this?
So the problem we have in the United States is we're experiencing a time in our history when it's the first time that there's been cooperation between government, business, and the media. That's a very, very dangerous situation. The media was always considered to be the fourth arm of government, who would constantly challenge what politicians were saying or what the government was doing, or maybe a relationship between government and business. But now we don't see that happening. Now the media is basically a bullhorn or a speaking platform for either the left or the right. We don't have independent media that really controls. And a lot of this is being done through social media, which we all know right now has been terrible when it comes to preventing freedom of speech, and they're the judge of what freedom of speech is and what it isn't, and
That's right.
that's going to have to be addressed, and it will,
That's
because
right. And
that
it's
is just so
important.
antithetical.
It's important
It's
that
extremely.
WHO also want to control this information during
Yeah.
possible public health emergency situation of international concerns.
Right, it's misinformation and disinformation, as they call it, and they'll be the sole judge of it. So just think about COVID-19. If you like the way the WHO and governments around the world handle the COVID-19 situation, well, then I guess what's coming down the road with the WHO would be good.
That's right.
But I don't think that that's the case. And what they're looking to do is they want to legalize, they want to formalize through law and treaty obligations, basically the same authority level that they had during COVID, utilizing the same principles. Tedros implemented what we call the China model, and he still believes that that is going to be the best way to move forward during pandemic periods of time. And that is not in the best interest of the United States. It's not in the best interest of the world for health purposes.
What do you think this letter can have some pressure on Joe Biden about this decision?
Yeah. It's going to be hard to really, okay, but let me get back to the reason for the purpose of the letter and the impact of the letter is because of that situation where the media is not really reporting on anything other than what the liberal government in the United States basically is looking to support, which is this development of the WHO. We're fighting a David and Goliath type of battle. So by having the AGs sign that letter, they have a very, very loud voice in what goes on in their states. And we have 22 of the 50 states right now that are saying, this is not legal. This is something that should not be permitted. And if it does, you can basically expect a lawsuit, especially when it comes to having the right of the United States Senate be the sole entity that reviews the treaty and comes up with a conclusion about whether or not it's beneficial for Americans.
Mm-hmm. Also, at the same time, there's a letter from who is signed by senators, a Republican Senate, 49 of them. We have also this letter. Can you tell us what is in this letter? It's from the 1st of May this year.
Right. Well, that's Senator Johnson from Wisconsin. Senator Johnson has been the lone, again, unfortunately, he's been the lone voice in the United States Senate standing up and fighting for the right of Americans in all the ills that have been going on with the United Nations, WHO. So the peak of this was in December of 2023. Senator Johnson sponsored a bill in the United States Senate and asked for a full vote. And the basis of the vote was demanding the right for the United States Senate to be the arm of government to give advice and consent, which is their constitutional duty, to the president, and it should include anything that is of a treaty status, which is what this upcoming vote in May is going to be in Geneva, regardless of how they describe it. Here's the outcome. The Senate is split right down the middle. And we, the conservative Republicans, lost that vote, meaning the Democrats voted right across party lines, and their vote was to deny themselves the right to provide advice and consent to the president. So they reneged on their constitutional duty. So when you got a Senate that won't stand up for the American people, when you got a Democratic Senate, when you have a Democratic president that is endorsing this, that's a David and Goliath battle. So will this letter by the attorney generals have an impact in Biden, which is what your original question was? It's not going to be one item that's going to help move the needle here, but that's a loud voice to be had. And there's others now that take example of this. And you're going to be seeing a real acceleration in attention being given to this in the United States. And over the next 2 weeks, I think you're really going to see a lot of activity that will move the needle. So this signature, the signatures of these 22 attorney generals is significant in lighting that fire.
Great. Well, we hope and we'll see what will happen in the next 2-3 weeks. I know that some point also will come from Europe because I'm involved in this. But there is a background with these activities, and you are a specialist in this. You know what was happening, how China influenced the United States in the last years. That's why you established this shield against them, state shield.
Yes. All right. Well, I'll get into that. Congratulations on your election, by the way. I mean, that's a really bright spotlight for Europe now. And best of luck to you. It's going to be an uphill battle, but it's the right battle to fight. So congratulations. You have our support. I can tell you that. The first thing that has to be said on the influence of China in relationship to the United States is China is at war with the United States, period. Now, the problem with that is a lot of Americans don't know it. And so what really motivated me, in addition to looking at protecting my grandchildren's future, is I sat in on a meeting of governors back in early 2023, right after COVID was basically, the world was reopening after COVID. And I listened to a conversation of several governors talking about the impact of China on their states. And it was a really, really basic conversation in that, in my opinion, did not address the severity of the problem or the intensity, and obviously the need to act quickly. So I started State Shield as an endeavor to really enlighten them through educational seminars and through policy recommendations. And we're late to the game. China has been working on this since the inception of their Communist Party back in 1949. It's obviously picked up intensity. And if you really want to know why they're as aggressive as they are today, it's because they built their economy. So we're going back to the money. And who built the economy? Well, it was the United States primarily and most of the world. And it was all part of the globalism era that we were going through. 80s through Reagan, in the 90s with Clinton, the Bushes through the 20s. And if we really thought that if we could help create a financially stable China, that they would act more appropriately within the world order. Well, they didn't have the same objective, and they never did. And they said it, and there were words, but we didn't listen to it. We were driven by greed. We were driven by the what I call the captured elites that looked at a 1.4 billion population and said, there's a market to be had there. We need to invest. And I could go right down the Fortune 500 if you know that anybody can do that. And they saw such an opportunity for growth. And yeah, they were right. There was an opportunity to grow for growth. But in doing it, they basically provided the income that built the Chinese military structure as it is today. And it's a formidable structure as far as the size and the proficiency. And they did that through stealing our technology, our intellectual property. And they've been doing that since the beginning. It's by command from the CCP and the PLA that they do this, basically the CCP. And we knew it was going on. We complained about it. When you know, how many times have you heard about businesses in the United States? So you probably have seen this in Europe too, where you get the knockoffs coming from China. Well, they'll have a popular product and they'll just knock it off and just ship it in, sell it at cheaper prices until they're sued and they have to close their doors, but they've done the damage, they've made the money. Mm-hmm. I mean, this has been going on for decades, and the only one who stood up to it was President Trump when he came in 2016. I think in 2017, when he issued his tariffs against the Chinese, I mean, that was revolutionary from an approach. It's kind of like we've been bullied for decades. And the only way to correct the bully is to bully him back, which is unfortunate. But they declared the terms of engagement at that point. And then Biden comes in and he changes it the day that he gets into office, and it's back to business as usual, which has been detrimental to the United States.
Yeah. And there was also a topic that Joe Biden has some private interest also in this, but we will not discuss about this because they are still discussing openly. But let me ask you, what is the goal of China? What they want to achieve with the United States?
Well, they've said it loud and clear. Xi Jinping has a goal by 2049 to be the predominant power throughout the world. This took a really clear path in 1989 after Tiananmen Square, when the CCP heard the chants from the crowd for democracy, democracy. Their antennas really went up and said, okay, we're growing to make China stronger economically, but we're going to lose our power. And it's always about power, control, and money. Those are the three key words. So if you remember correctly, maybe if your audience is aware, China closed its museum in Beijing, and they didn't open it up again until 2003. And when it reopened, it was a revision of Chinese history. And, they're really big into only passing on the information that they want their people to hear. Kind of like what's going on with the social media networks here in the United States, the way they block information, which we have to stop. And in doing so, the message was loud and clear. He came out, Xi Jinping, and in 2013, he came to the United States and he met with President Obama. And they had apparently, their nice meeting. And at the very end of the meeting, both presidents stand in front of the microphone and they give their little talk about what they talked about, the success of their chats. And in that statement, Xi Jinping said, China believes that there's room for two superpowers in the Pacific. So he was saying loud and clear that they wanted to become the hegemonic power in the Pacific. They resented the fact that we had that much control over what was going on in the Pacific. And everything they've done since then, you can go back and check the building of the islands, the building of their Air Force, the building of their Navy in particular, the number of boats they have. And if the second meeting was with President Biden in December of 2023. And they had their meeting, they had their little microphone opportunity at the end. And at that time, Xi Jinping says, China believes that there's room for two superpowers in the world. So that they've said what their goal is. And in my opinion, they basically have achieved their goal in the Pacific. I mean, if they really wanted to become the hegemonic power, which they're working at still, they have a very, very strong chance of doing it, of succeeding, which is negative. So let's just talk about the implications of that for a second, if you don't mind.
Of course.
So what the United States afforded the world after World War II was the guarantee for free trade. And through our Navy and through our military, we basically kept the trade lanes open. For good or bad, in any kind of conversation, there's always going to be something that'll be negative. But overall, keeping the trade lanes open was great for growth of nations around the world. And it was our values that are based in our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, the freedoms that are innate for the most part. You look at the values that exist in China. I mean, they've got the Uyghurs in concentration camp. They're doing organ transplants, a large business for them, and they're taking them from their prisoners. That's been documented time and time again. You're seeing legislation now evolve in the United States forbidding any insurance company from paying for organ transplants that have to do with anything with China, people that travel abroad. So you're going to be seeing a large tick up in all of these anti-Chinese type of activities, especially when they're counter to our values. So they do not adhere to a value. They do not value human life as we do in democracies in Europe and in the United States. The first thing that the people of China are taught to honor is the state. The state comes first. And then there's a distant second, which is the right of the people. And this is how the Chinese treat their people in China through their control system, the way they control the flow of money, the demands. There's a litany of items that we could discuss, not necessary. I think the overall concept is understood. And they're now going to implement their value system. If they become the hegemonic power, their value system will dominate, and it will dominate in all of the neighboring states, all the neighboring nations. So unfortunately, a lot of the nations in that realm of the world, the Pacific Rim, are small, don't have the power to stand up to China if somebody like America is not there to challenge that and allow them to maintain their freedom. But if and when that happens, those countries will be falling under the value system of China. And the only thing China is interested in is in advancing the state. That's why they have their new national security policy, where if anybody comes over to the United States, any of their nationalist Chinese, their duty is to spy on behalf of the homeland for the CCP. And that's why we have such high intellectual theft, in my opinion, in the United States. And the highest level of intellectual theft comes from researchers who are either postgraduate or postdoctoral that get jobs in research firms, and they're often technology-based. And we have numerous lawsuits. And our own FBI director has says one of his biggest challenges is in addressing the daily influx of challenges that come as a byproduct of Chinese activity in the United States.
Yeah. And also I explained in one of my shows, there is a big influence in the present situation with this Agenda 2030 and WEF, that means World Economic Forum, signed a contract with UN to implement Agenda 2030. And the guy who is in charge, Klaus Schwab, said numerous times that that China's society, exactly, the China is a role model, how world will have to look like. That means they are not hiding. They want to implement the same social structure like in China in Western countries.
Yeah, this is a problem. He's been going for the better part of 30, 40 years. And he's got quite a following, unfortunately. So what makes the WEF so appealing to so many people? In a sense, you can look at in America, which is the major economic power in the world. If you have an era of Bush, Republican, Obama, Democratic, Trump, Republican, Biden, Democratic, every 4 years, you could be seeing a change in presidential leadership, and the policies would be drastically different between the two. What the world's looking for, and the world economic is made up of elites. You look at John Kerry when he says, isn't it great that we as elites have the ability to be making these decisions for the rest of the world, or for basically the peons, as I interpreted what he says. They think that they're above and beyond everybody else in the world. Well, the elites want consistency. They want to be able to know that what they're investing in today and what their efforts are in are going to be protected for the long haul. And that's why Klaus Schwab has said we really recognize and support the China type model of government. It's a dictatorship. So there's consistency in that. There's whether or not it's making good decisions, it's consistency. And that's why Xi Jinping is probably really glad that WEF is doing, because everything that's being done is being done to destroy the United States. What sets us aside and what keeps China intact or at base to some degree, and what keeps the WEF from moving forward, is the fact that we have a Constitution and a Bill of Rights that makes us very, very, very unique and recognizes the freedoms that we have and the value of the human life. With that intact, it makes their job harder. So their job is to destroy us. And when I started off this conversation with you, my first comment was, China is at war with America. And they're using a process to fight us called unrestricted warfare. The unrestricted warfare was written in 1999 by two colonels in the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, who are much, much higher in rank now because it's been such a success. They published it initially and then they took it right off so it couldn't be seen, but it was captured and it's in print form now and it's available if people want to read it. It's a great expose for about the first 2/3 about how they analyzed our military capability and how we have progressed militarily and where we stood. And then the last third of the book primarily gets into this whole concept of unrestricted warfare, where they knew, as because America was the hegemonic power in the Pacific, along the Pacific Rim, that there was no way they were going to beat us militarily. So they had to do everything and anything they could other than shoot a bullet or drop a bomb to attack us. And basically, their goal was to destroy us. And they are on their way. And I'll give you an example. So this fentanyl situation we have in the United States, the fentanyl is being supplied by China. Originally, it was in just raw form, was shipped to Mexico. The cartels would turn it into tablets, whatever form they wanted, give it to the mules to bring across the border, and then resell it. Now that the border is open, which is a dereliction of duty, in my opinion, of the President of the United States, his first job is to protect the safety of the American people. He certainly has not done that by passing on his responsibility. And the border was safe before he got into office. Crime against humanity. It's a shame what's going on there. But anyway, so now that the cartels have crossed the border, they set up their operations here in the United States. China now sends finished product to Mexico. Mexico brings it over the border. Cartels sell it. Billions of dollars are made on this. So it's the money factor again. And the secondary money factor is the human trafficking that's going on. That's probably bigger than the fentanyl right now for the cartels in the United States. That's the crime against humanity. Children. It's so sad. So you've got cash now being collected by the cartels. So what they do is, it's understood that this money goes to the Chinese consulates. Chinese consulates then inform Beijing, and Beijing wires money over to Mexico. It's how they money launder it. And then you hear the stories about how the Chinese are buying land in the United States for cash. Well, where's that cash coming from? It's insidious when you really think about it. But they have been working at this so long. They are so good at what they do. They're always 2, 3, and 4 steps ahead of us. America is just waking up to what's going on. COVID was a wake-up call for a lot of things. It was had a lot to do with the school systems and the way they were being taken over by the liberal left mind, about how government could work to actually take away our civil rights and our civil liberties, our constitutional rights. And then it morphed over to paying more attention when folks like myself, and there's quite a number of folks like me out there trying to really bring the message to the American people. Every time we do something, even if it's as simple as getting 22 AGs to sign a letter, we're moving that needle to bring light to what's really a world infestation, trying to create that one world order. So if we don't block, if the World Economic Forum, if the WHO passes in any sense of the word what they're trying to do, it will be the original creation of a one world order. A lot of countries are probably going to drop out. I think when we get a new administration, if former President Trump was to get reelected, he's already said that he would pull out of the WHO again, and he would cancel all financing or any payments to the WHO again, which Biden reintroduced. And they're pushing to have this pass before the next administration comes in, whether it be Democratic or Republican. They're doing it basically, I think, in fear of it being a Republican. So the other part of your question, which you stated earlier, was the pandemic treaty did not meet its deadline, and it looked like it was going to go down in flames. And then they miraculously came out Friday afternoon, about a couple of hours after the announcement, and said, okay, we've agreed that we're going to extend the conversation on this for 2 weeks, which basically puts it right up to the vote time in Geneva. So we have a saying in the United States, it's going to become a Nancy Pelosi moment. And she's famous for saying the words, you have to pass the bill to find out what's in it. Do you
Really?
remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That means they need to vote for it and then find out what is in it.
Yeah, but this time the consequences are not just you have to pay extra money or you have this law. It's a binding treaty on countries that will have devastating effect and will last a long time because it's not easy, according to the amendments, to get out of this. I think you have a 10-month review, then there's another year period, and I'm not sure what the final amendments are going to say. It could be a 2-year period before you get out. It's the same concept of bringing over bogus goods from China, and you'll sell them for 2 or 3 years, and then when you finally get caught at doing it, you stop, but the damage has been done. So even if you want to get out and you have to get out years later, the damage is done in between, and they know that. And then it grows like a cancer. They never stop at what they're doing. And if this is defeated, two things happen. One is it will be prevention of the implementation of the first representation of a one world order, but it will also be the forewarning that the battle really is just continued, is just begun, because they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop. There's too much money behind it. There's too many people of influence. It is the David and Goliath battle. We are fighting a very, very good battle. We need more people to get involved. And I'm really looking to Europe to step up to the plate more than what they're doing. And God bless you all for your opportunity.
Tell me, what is the time frame we have? What is your suggestion for Croatian government, for example, new elected ministers or government in Croatia?
Well, you look what happened in Argentina. That's a very, very good sign. I would say you step up to the plate quickly. You state your values. You state what your position is for your people, for the rights of your people, and for prosperity, and your opposition to authoritarian rule, whether that be in the media, the social media, from businesses. You have to always assume that you have to set the example. And if you have other people you want to exemplify, fine, but be that example. Set your standards high. You don't have an effective organization if you don't have rock solid standards. Get your standards established, voice them, and then work to achieve them would be my best advice.
Which time frame we have?
Well, you're really just setting up what you're doing. I don't know how much of an impact you can have on what's going on for the upcoming vote in Geneva, but my recommendation would be to be that country that opposes the implementation of the amendment updates in the pandemic treaty. Now, their biggest violation, by the way, is that by UN charter, these amendments and the pandemic treaty, which is a new version, were to be shared or disseminated to every one of the 196 countries participating in the World Health Assembly in May, 4 months prior to the vote, which meant that every country should have had this information by January 27th. And they found a way to get around it, just as they found a way to get around the deadline that happened on Friday when the pandemic treaty was supposed to be in its revised final date. So they're always finding ways to get around what the rules are. Their standards are not intact. They are not honoring the standards that have been established for decades by the United Nations, which is an indication that what they really just want to do is just ram it through. They're going to do anything they can to get this through because they know that it's the impetus of what their ultimate goal is. Now, you had mentioned something earlier. I don't know if you want to get to it, but the 30-30 plan?
2030.
30-30, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is all part of it because the 30-30 plan is really the 50-50 plan. But they can't hit us with the 50-50 plan because it's too aggressive, so they start with the 30-30 plan. And it already was attempted in America. There was an attempt made to monetize nature through what's called a natural asset company. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I heard it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a fairly devious attempt, and they want to set up the ability to take areas, and President Biden offered all of the federal land in the United States to have a protective dome over it, a cloud over it that would be called a natural asset company. And the owners of that natural asset would have the right to control the environment underneath the dome. They didn't have to own the land. They just had the right to control the environment, which meant they had control of the land. And I mean, you can just think about it, about all the directions that could go. The other thing that the NACs were prohibited from doing was mining and drilling for oil. So it was really a liberal attempt to further denigrate the fossil fuel business, or the opportunity for generating energy by way of fossil fuel. But the negative is that this would have been offered to sovereign entities, which would have included what we in the United States call the 4 countries of concern. It's put out by our Commerce Department. It includes China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And when it comes to education, Qatar is on that. So what the fear of that was, or what the real danger was, foreign entities could own natural asset companies. And if they happen to be located over an area where the United States may have been mining for rare earth minerals, which is essential for our national security because China dominates the majority of the rare earth minerals. And if China happened to own that NAC, they could simply say, I'm sorry, there's no mining here. You got to buy your rare earth minerals from China now. Or if I was an OPEC member and had the NAC where we were drilling for natural gas or oil, I would simply say, you can't drill for oil. You got to buy your oil from OPEC now. I mean, those are very simple examples, but devastating examples. And there's no limit to what the dangers could have been. So that was just stopped, by the way, in January of this year. That began last October. And that was already stated in Biden's plan. If you really went back and researched what his government was putting out in papers, the NACs was in there. So it was timed to be right before what's going on with the WHO, because a critical element in the NACs was the One Health. The One Health basically said, we value equally human life, animal life, and plant life. Yeah. Everything was on the same scale. So getting back to 3030, the NACs was an attempt to decommission the use of land. They wanted to bring it back to its unused state. The real goal, according to the WEF, is to have a 50-50 plan internationally. That means 50% of the seas and 50% of the lands will be untouched and unused and brought back to the natural state. That's very troublesome on a lot of fronts. That's your 30-30 plan. And there's a statement, there's a meeting at the United Nations this fall, and they're going to be looking at trying to get some form of formulation of some type of foundation established that will start to bring this about. They're not stopping. They are so good at what they're doing. They're well thought out. They're thinking the long term. They're thinking the long game, and they're strategizing. This is a chess game for them, and they're playing very well. And America is waking up, but we're not there.
Thank you, Joe. It was really a pleasure, and thank you for your work. And I hope that you will have success with this letter. And very soon we'll find out what is happening, and I hope in Croatia we'll move some things forward.
Thank you very much. And anytime I can afford an update, I'm more than happy to do it. Best of luck to you folks out there in Croatia. I mean, God bless you. You have a wonderful opportunity to be a real voice for the world. And I pray to God that you take advantage of that opportunity. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Evo, dragi narode, ja sam bio jedan od ljudi koji je krajem prošle godine ugostio neke od međunarodnih stručnjaka i tema je bila Svjetska zdravstvena organizacija, a naš domaćin je bila stranka Domovinski pokret. Sada ovog trenutka dok se snima, Domovinski pokret je sklopio koaliciju sa vladajućom strankom HDZ. Među dijelove programa koje je stavio jeste i Svjetska zdravstvena organizacija, odnosno odbijanje ugovora sa Svjetskom zdravstvenom organizacijom i promjenom smjera upravo ovih opasnosti u kojima smo mi danas razgovarali. Stoga sada je prilika da pokažu da to obećanje koje su tada dali svojim glasačima i razumijevanje problema koji smo danas i objasnili, da će to implementirati u svoju stvarnu politiku jer imaju priliku, sada su na vlasti. Stoga vjerujem da će Hrvatska biti jedna od rijetkih zemalja koja će prva snažnije stati u odbranu vlastitog suvereniteta i neće dozvoliti da neizabrani svjetske birokrate, čiju kontrolu apsolutno nemamo, upravljaju budućim izvanrednim situacijama koje smo već svjedočili mogu sami kreirati kada god zažele. Stoga pred nama je vrlo zanimljivo razdoblje upravo odluke o tome da li će Hrvatska prihvatiti nove međunarodne zdravstvene regulacije i novi ugovor o budućim pandemijama ili će jednostavno prihvatiti naloge Brisela kao uvijek do sada i postati jedna od članica koja će u budućim izvanrednim situacijama svoju suverenost predati Svjetskoj zdravstvenoj organizaciji. Hvala vam lijepo na pažnji, uskoro se vidimo u sljedećoj epizodi Slobodnog.
Nitko vas neće natjerati da se poklonite zvijeri, učinit ćete to svojevoljno, odbacujući vjeru. Bićete laka meta za zvijeri, jer se niste podredili vjeri. Ako se ne podredite vjeri, podredit ćete se zvijeri. Toliko ćete se suobličiti sa ovim svijetom, da nećete ni prepoznati da ste u zabludi. Biće to najveća demonska prevara ikada i pravedno zaslužena osuda nad nepokajanim grešnicima.
Gdje su svi oni koji su